The year was 978 after Christ, and in the shadow of Norway's towering fjords, where morning mist clung to dark waters like the breath of sleeping giants, a young man named Bjorn Windcatcher was about to shatter the sacred traditions of an entire civilization. Picture this scene, if you will. The assembled thing, that ancient Norse gathering where law and fate intertwined like rope and timber, sits in judgment on the son of a disgraced shipwright. Bjorn stands before these weathered faces, these men who've carved their lives from wood and wave, holding in his trembling hands what they consider an abomination, a sail design that defies 3 centuries of divine tradition. Now, I want you to understand something crucial here. When we talk about Viking shipbuilding, we're not talking about mere craftsmanship. We're talking about religion, politics, and power, all rolled into one sacred practice. These weren't just boats to the Norse. They were living beings, blessed by priests of Njord, the god who controlled the winds and waves. Each morning, before a single plank was shaped or nail-driven, the shipwrights would begin with prayers and offerings. The patterns for their square sails, revealed by the gods themselves, or so they believed. Master shipwright Thorvald Irongrip. And what a name that is, right? Points his accusing finger at young Bjorn like he's identifying a plague carrier. And in a way, he is, because what Bjorn holds in his hands represents something far more dangerous than technical innovation. It represents the terrifying possibility that everything they've believed about the divine nature of their craft might be wrong. Here's where it gets really interesting. Bjorn's revolutionary design came from whispered tales told by Irish slaves. Think about that for a moment. In a society built on conquest and cultural supremacy, where Viking shipbuilders considered themselves the absolute masters of the sea, the seeds of revolution were planted by the very people they'd enslaved. These Irish captives spoke of swift Mediterranean vessels with triangular sails that could dance with the wind in ways Viking minds couldn't comprehend. The guilds. And yes, the Vikings had guilds just like their continental counterparts, guarded their monopoly more fiercely than any dragon guarded gold. They controlled not just construction techniques but the spiritual essence of seafaring itself. When Bjorn's father had dared to suggest minor improvements to hull design, he lost everything. His workshop, his reputation, his standing in the community, all gone. Now here stands his son, proposing not minor tweaks but a complete reimagining of how ships catch the wind. As thunder rolls across the fjord, because of course there's a storm brewing, this is Norway we're talking about, Bjorn makes his desperate defense. And listen to what he's claiming. His modified sail design uses 30% less cloth while capturing 40% more wind. Let that sink in for a moment. Imagine you're a Viking trader, scraping together every ounce of precious wool and linen for your sail, only to hear that some exile's son has figured out how to do more with less. But it's not just about efficiency. Bjorn's triangular forward sail, combined with modified square rigging, allows ships to sail closer to the wind than anyone thought possible. Where traditional vessels must wait for favorable winds, sometimes for days or weeks, his design can harness breezes from multiple directions. Do you realize what this means for a civilization built on maritime trade and warfare? It's like someone in the age of horse-drawn carriages, suddenly inventing the internal combustion engine. The assembled warriors and craftsmen, though, they see only blasphemy. When Bjorn speaks his prophecy, that within a generation, his forbidden sails will carry Norse ships faster than Thor's own chariot, you can practically feel the religious fury rippling through the crowd. This isn't just technical criticism anymore. This is heresy of the highest order. Thorvald Irongrip, keeper of the old ways, demands immediate execution. And why not? In his mind, Bjorn has committed the ultimate sin. He's claimed to improve upon divine perfection. But here's where Norse law shows its complexity. The law speaker, that crucial figure who must balance tradition with justice, pronounces not death but exile. 3 days. Bjorn has 3 days to leave Norway forever, or face the headsman's axe. Standing steady beside him through the jeers and threats is his young Pictish wife, Moira. She's not Norse, which makes her suspect in many eyes, but she's also not broken by this judgment. The two of them met during Bjorn's apprenticeship travels, those formative years when young craftsmen learned their trade by working in foreign lands. Think about the irony here. The very system that was supposed to strengthen Norse traditions by exposing apprentices to foreign techniques has produced its own undoing. Together, as the hostile crowd disperses and storm clouds gather, they make their way to a ship laden with their few possessions. Their destination? The Orkney Islands. Now, if you know anything about medieval geography, you'll understand why this choice is so significant. Orkney wasn't just a random collection of windswept rocks, it was a crossroads. Norse, Celtic, and distant trading routes all converged there. It was a place where outcasts could disappear, where foreigners could blend in, where radical ideas might find fertile ground. As their small vessel disappears into the storm-tossed waters, carrying Bjorn and his forbidden knowledge toward an uncertain future, the assembled thing believes they've solved their problem. They've banished the heretic and preserved the sacred traditions. They have no idea that they've just lit the fuse on a revolution that will transform Viking civilization forever. But that's a story for tomorrow. Tonight, as we leave young Bjorn sailing into exile with his revolutionary sail design tucked safely away from prying eyes, one question hangs in the salt air like the cry of a hunting gull. What happens when forbidden knowledge finds desperate allies willing to risk everything for the promise of power? What happens when the outcasts of one society become the innovators who reshape the world? 3 winters have passed in Orkney's harsh embrace, and the year 981, after Christ finds our exiled shipwright, transformed from desperate refugee to underground legend. But this isn't one of those simple success stories, where the hero overcomes adversity through sheer determination. No. What's happened to Bjorn Windcatcher in these windswept islands is far more complex and fascinating. His workshop, built into the ruins of ancient Pictish stone circles, has become something unprecedented in the Norse world. A sanctuary where innovation meets necessity, where the desperate and the brilliant converge to create something entirely new. Picture this. Irish slaves freed by Scottish raids working alongside failed Norse merchants and Celtic fishermen. Each brings fragments of maritime knowledge like pieces of a vast puzzle. An Arab mathematical principle here, learned from a trader who'd sailed from Cordoba. A Byzantine rope technique there, whispered by a refugee from Constantinople. This isn't just cultural exchange. This is the kind of cross-pollination that changes civilizations. And Moira? She's proven absolutely essential to this entire operation. Her Celtic weaving patterns, dismissed by Norse traditionalists as primitive decoration, are creating sailcloth of unprecedented strength. The way she interlaces the fibers, following patterns passed down through generations of Pictish women, produces fabric that can withstand stresses that would tear conventional Norse sailcloth to ribbons. Their young daughter Astrid plays among wood, shavings and prototype models, while above them, experimental sails bearing Norse runes alongside Celtic spirals dry in that constant Orkney wind. Now, here's what makes Bjorn's exile so strategically brilliant. Whether by design or pure luck, he's positioned himself at the absolute intersection of trade routes while maintaining careful secrecy about his innovations. Only select traders have seen Sleipnir's shadow, his prototype vessel that seems to dance across waves with impossible grace. And when I say dance, I mean it literally appears to defy the laws of nature as Norse sailors understand them. Word spreads in whispers through the taverns and trading posts of the North Sea. There's a madman in Orkney who can make ships fly. Most dismiss such tales as fantasy, the kind of exaggerated stories that grow in the telling. But Jarl Eric the Bold, he doesn't have the luxury of dismissal. Because Eric is trapped in a Scottish inlet, with 50 enemy ships bearing down on his 15 vessels, facing certain annihilation from an alliance of rival Norse clans led by the ruthless Hakon Bloodaxe. Think about Eric's position for a moment. Here's a man who's built his entire reputation on tactical brilliance, facing odds that would make even the gods pause. His escape routes are blocked, his supplies are dwindling, and every dawn brings the enemy closer to his position. Then he remembers his grandfather's stories, tales told by firelight about impossible sails seen in distant waters. Stories dismissed as the ramblings of an old man who'd seen too many battles. The midnight meeting between Erik and Bjorn crackles with the kind of tension you only get when desperate men encounter revolutionary possibilities. Erik's most trusted warriors have slipped through enemy lines in a small fishing boat, navigating treacherous waters, where one wrong turn means capture and certain death. They find Bjorn no longer the desperate young exile who fled Norway 3 years earlier, but a confident innovator surrounded by loyal followers from half a dozen different cultures. The demonstration of Sleipnir's shadow leaves these hardened Vikings speechless. We're talking about men who've seen sea serpents and sailed through storms that would terrify modern mariners, struck dumb by the sight of a ship that defies everything they thought they knew about wind and water. In waters where their fastest longship achieves 6 knots, and that's flying downwind with every prayer to Njord answered, Bjorn's vessel cuts through waves at 10 knots, turning impossibly close to the wind like it's mocking the very concept of physics. Master shipwright Olaf, who accompanied Erik's men and has spent 30 years perfecting traditional techniques, falls to his knees on the rocky shore. In that instant, watching Sleipnir's shadow carve impossible angles through the chop, 30 years of absolute certainty crumble like a poorly mortised joint. Everything he thought he knew about the turf, relationship between wind and sail, about the sacred geometry of shipbuilding, has just been revealed as incomplete at best. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because both Erik and Bjorn prove themselves to be strategic thinkers operating on levels that go far beyond simple desperation. Erik's offer isn't just about restored honor or even survival. He's proposing a complete transformation of Norse naval power, protection, patronage, and most importantly, legitimacy for innovations that the homeland considers heretical. Bjorn's demands, though, they reveal a man who's thought deeply about the broader implications of his work. He wants recognition for his multicultural crew, Irish, Celtic, and Norse, working as equals. He demands trading rights in Norwegian ports for vessels built with his techniques, and most crucially, he insists on the right to train new shipbuilders without guild interference. Think about what he's really asking for here: the complete dismantling of the traditional monopoly system that has controlled Norse shipbuilding for centuries. As dawn approaches over the Orkney waters, painting the sky in shades that would make the old gods weep, they strike their bargain. Within 2 days, Bjorn and his best craftsmen are swarming over Erik's flagship Wave Serpent, retrofitting her with the forbidden sail design. It's like watching medieval Formula One mechanics preparing for the race of their lives. But here's the kicker. Just as they're putting the finishing touches on their modifications, Thorvald Irongrip's son Magnus arrives with guild enforcers, having tracked the rumours back to their source. The old guard isn't giving up without a fight. Magnus brings with him the full authority of the traditional shipbuilding establishment, ready to destroy this heretical workshop and everything in it. Erik's warriors, though, ensure no interference. These aren't diplomatic negotiations anymore. This is armed standoff between the forces of tradition and the promise of revolution. The race against time becomes literally that. They must complete the modifications before Hakon Bloodaxe's scouts discover Erik's position, and before Magnus can rally enough support to destroy Bjorn's workshop. As the modified Wave Serpent prepares for what may be her maiden voyage and final battle, with her revolutionary sails furled against masts that traditional builders would consider cursed, the stage is set for a confrontation that will determine not just the fate of Erik's fleet, but the entire future of Norse maritime supremacy. The forbidden knowledge is about to meet its ultimate test in the crucible of actual combat. But can innovation triumph over overwhelming numbers? Can 3 years of exile produce weapons capable of defeating 3 centuries of tradition? The answers lie waiting in the storm-tossed waters off the Scottish coast, where tomorrow's dawn will bring either vindication or annihilation. The Battle of Caithness begins with laughter. As morning fog lifts like a theatre curtain to reveal the modified Wave Serpent anchored among Erik's fleet, Hakon Bloodaxe's warriors actually mock the strange triangular sail configuration. You can picture these hardened Norse veterans, men who've raided from Ireland to the Baltic, pointing and jeering at what they consider the desperate improvisation of a doomed enemy. Their amusement dies in their throats when Erik's flagship surges forward at impossible speed. Now, I want you to really visualize what happens next, because this is one of those moments in history where everything changes in the span of heartbeats. The wave serpent doesn't just move faster than any ship these warriors have ever seen. She reaches Hakon's battle line before the war horns finish sounding their challenge. Think about that timing. In traditional Norse naval combat, there's a ritual to these things. Ships approach in formation, horns blow, insults are exchanged. And then, the grinding, brutal melee begins. But Bjorn's innovations have just compressed that entire timeline into chaos. What follows revolutionizes Norse naval warfare in ways that won't be fully understood for generations. The wave serpent strikes like her serpentine namesake, using superior speed and maneuverability to hit enemy vessels before they can form defensive positions. Eric's outnumbered fleet, following their flagship's lead into this new form of combat, discovers that one ship with Bjorn's sails can outmaneuver 3 traditional vessels. It's like watching cavalry charge against infantry, except both sides thought they were fighting the same battle until the moment everything changed. Bjorn himself stands at Eric's shoulder throughout the engagement, and this detail is crucial. He's not hiding below decks or safely ashore. He's calling wind patterns and angle adjustments like some kind of maritime battle conductor. The forbidden sail design proves its worth spectacularly in ways even its creator hadn't fully anticipated, where enemy ships must turn downwind in wide, predictable arcs. Those sweeping maneuvers that every Norse captain has drilled into his bones. The wave serpent pivots like a living creature responding to its rider's thoughts. By midday, when the sun reaches its peak over waters now stained with blood and burning timber, 7 of Hakon's 50 ships are ablaze, while Eric has lost only 1 vessel. But here's what's really decisive. It's not just the tactical advantage that's winning this battle. It's the psychological impact. Picture yourself as one of Hakon's jarls, watching ships you considered invincible being outmaneuvered by what you thought was impossible technology. Your entire understanding of naval combat, everything you've built your reputation on, is being systematically dismantled before your eyes. The alliance supporting Hakon begins to crumble in real time. These aren't mindless berserkers we're talking about. These are political leaders who've calculated the odds and thrown their lot in with what seemed like the certain winner. But faced with technology they can't understand, let alone counter, they start hedging their bets. Ships begin withdrawing from the battle line, their captains suddenly discovering urgent business elsewhere. Hakon himself, that ruthless leader who seemed unstoppable just hours earlier, barely escapes in a damaged vessel. His flagship, the pride of his fleet and symbol of his power, burns like a funeral pyre while he flees northward with the handful of ships still loyal enough or terrified enough to follow. The battle becomes a rout, but it's a very specific kind of rout, one that announces to the entire Norse world that the rules of the game have fundamentally changed. Victory transforms everything, but not in the simple way you might expect. Within weeks of word spreading about the impossible battle, ambitious jarls from Iceland to Denmark are seeking audience with the restored Bjorn Windcatcher. But they're not just coming for the technology. They're coming because they understand that naval superiority now depends on something entirely new. The traditional guild monopoly doesn't just crack, it shatters like ice hit with a warhammer. Thorvald Irongrip leads violent resistance to these changes, organizing attacks on shipyards adopting the new methods. Think about his position for a moment. Everything he's devoted his life to, preserving, is being swept away by innovations he considers fundamentally heretical. But here's where the story gets really complex. His son Magnus is secretly visiting Bjorn's workshop, torn between family loyalty and the undeniable evidence of his own eyes. The workshops become literal battlegrounds between old and new, with traditional builders attempting sabotage, while others desperately try to understand the revolutionary techniques. Some of Bjorn's early adopters wake to find their experimental sails slashed, their modified masts mysteriously weakened. But for every act of sabotage, 2 more builders convert to the new methods, because superior technology has a way of speaking for itself. Bjorn navigates this chaos with the strategic thinking that first caught Eric's attention. He doesn't just license his design to anyone with silver to pay. He insists on training periods where Norse shipwrights work alongside his international crew. This isn't just quality control, It's forced cultural exchange. Traditional builders who've never worked with anyone but other Norse craftsmen suddenly find themselves learning from Irish rope workers and Celtic sail weavers. The Great Race of 984 emerges from this tension like a trial by combat, but fought with wind and wave instead of sword and shield. It's a formal challenge where traditional ships race against sail-modified vessels from Trondheim to Shetland, before assembled kings and jarls, including the Danish ruler Harald Bluetooth himself. When 5 ships bearing Bjorn's design arrive a full day ahead of their traditional competitors, the demonstration ends all serious opposition to the new methods. Even Thorvald Irongrip, witnessing the undeniable evidence with his own eyes, performs an act that will be remembered as long as Norse ships sail northern waters. He ceremonially breaks his guild hammer, the symbol of his authority and the tradition he's defended his entire life, and requests training in the new methods. It's a moment of capitulation, but also of wisdom. Sometimes the greatest courage lies not in defending the old ways, but in recognizing when the world has fundamentally changed. But this triumph raises new questions that will echo through the next phase of our story. What happens when revolutionary technology spreads beyond its creator's control? What are the consequences when innovations that reshape warfare also transform trade, exploration, and the very structure of society? Bjorn, Windcatcher, has won his battle against tradition, but the war between old and new has just begun to reveal its true scope. By 990 years after Christ, just 12 short years after Bjorn's exile from Norway, his innovation has reshaped Viking civilization in ways that would have seemed impossible to those who once condemned him as a heretic. But this isn't just a story about faster ships. It's about how technological revolution cascades through every aspect of a society built on maritime supremacy. Let me paint you the picture of what these seemingly simple sail modifications have unleashed. Trade routes that took 2 months now take 5 weeks, and that 40% reduction in travel time means everything changes. Merchants can complete an extra voyage each season, which might not sound revolutionary until you consider the mathematics of compound advantage. A trader who once made 2 profitable runs per year can now make 3. Over a decade, that's the difference between modest success and extraordinary wealth. The Dublin slave markets receive goods 40% faster. Varangian guards reach Constantinople with spring's first winds instead of summer's heat, giving them crucial advantages in Byzantine court politics. Settlements in Iceland and Greenland, previously isolated for half the year by impossible sailing conditions, maintain regular contact with Norway through the darkest months. Some claim, though Bjorn himself remains modestly silent on such matters, that Leif Eriksson's successful voyage to Vinland depended on sails cut to the Windcatcher's specifications. But here's what's really fascinating. The transformation extends far beyond mere speed. Bjorn's workshops, now established in 6 major ports from Bergen to Dublin, have become centres of cultural fusion that would have been unthinkable under the old guild system. Young shipwrights don't just learn construction techniques anymore, they study mathematics from Arab texts, learn Mediterranean navigation methods, and incorporate Celtic ropework into their training. It's like medieval universities, but focused on practical innovation rather than theological debate. His daughter Astrid, trained by both her Norse father and Celtic mother, becomes the first recognized female sail designer in Viking history. Her work is particularly prized because she incorporates Moira's strengthening patterns with mathematical precision that even Arab scholars find impressive. Think about what this represents. In a society where women's roles were rigidly defined, technological revolution has created space for abilities that traditional structures would never have recognized. The economic implications prove equally revolutionary. Ships carrying more cargo with smaller crews generate higher profits, which fund further expansion and exploration. The entire economic model of Viking trade shifts from bulk goods carried by large crews to high-value items transported efficiently. This isn't just evolution. It's the kind of paradigm shift that creates new classes of wealthy merchants and fundamentally alters the balance of power within Norse society. Thorvald Irongrip, Bjorn's former enemy who once demanded his execution, becomes an unlikely chronicler of the revolution he initially opposed. His scrolls preserve both traditional methods and new innovations, recognizing with the wisdom of age that honoring the past requires embracing the future. He writes, in careful runic script, that the gods reveal truth through many voices, and sometimes the most important revelations come from those we least expect to hear. The spiritual adaptation proves most fascinating of all. Progressive priests of Njord develop new blessing ceremonies that incorporate the triangular sails geometry into sacred symbolism. They speak of Njord revealing hidden knowledge through foreign voices, making the once forbidden divine through theological innovation. It's remarkable how quickly religious authorities can reinterpret doctrine when faced with undeniable practical advantages. But no story, no matter how triumphant, escapes the weight of mortality. 998 years after Christ finds Bjorn Windcatcher, now in his 60th year, facing his final voyage. Dying from a lifetime of harsh weather and harder work, with hands gnarled from decades of rope and timber, he insists on one last demonstration that will become the stuff of legend. Sleipnir's Shadow, his first successful prototype, and the vessel that started this entire revolution, has been magnificently restored by craftsmen who learned their trade in workshops he established. As thousands gather along the Norwegian fjords, he once fled in disgrace. The old shipwright takes the helm one final time. His funeral becomes the kind of event that defines how a civilization remembers its greatest innovators. Picture this scene: the forbidden sails that changed the course of history blazing against the setting sun as Bjorn's ship carries him beyond the horizon toward whatever waits in the western seas. Vikings who once called his innovations heretical now line the shores in respectful silence. Former enemies stand beside grateful allies. Children who've never known a world without the Windcatcher's innovations watch wide-eyed as living history disappears into legend. Astrid speaks the final words her father taught her, words that capture everything he learned during his journey from exile to revolutionary. The wind belongs to no one nation, no single tradition. We only learn to catch it better. It's a simple statement, but it contains within it the wisdom that innovation comes not from rejecting the past, but from understanding that improvement is both possible and necessary. Within a generation of Bjorn's death, no Viking ship sails without some variation of his once forbidden design. The guild system he challenged has evolved into something more flexible, more open to foreign ideas and cross-cultural collaboration. The technological revolution he sparked reaches far beyond sailing, inspiring innovations in everything from agriculture to metalworking. But perhaps most importantly, Bjorn Windcatcher's legacy lives on in the idea that transformation is possible, that even the most sacred traditions can be improved upon by those brave enough to challenge conventional wisdom. In a world where change often comes through conquest and destruction, he proved that innovation could achieve what violence never could, the willing adoption of better ideas by those wise enough to recognize their value. His story reminds us that progress often begins with an exile, a dreamer, someone dismissed by their contemporaries as dangerous or deluded. The difference between visionary and heretic, it turns out, is usually nothing more than time and the willingness of others to see beyond the boundaries of what they've always believed possible. And so the wind that once carried Bjorn into exile carried his ideas back home, transforming not just how ships sailed, but how an entire civilization understood the relationship between tradition and innovation. In the end, perhaps that's the most revolutionary idea of all, that the future belongs not to those who cling most tightly to the past, but to those who dare to catch the wind in new ways.